It's not easier to be
No.
bi. Like, if I could be, like, within, like, a binary or whatever, like, that society has, like, taught us to be with, like, confined to, it would make my life so much easier, but oops, I can't be confined. That should be the title of my memoir, like, Can't Be Confined, like, a Vishaal Reddy story, because that's my life in a nutshell.
Hello, and welcome to Two Bi Guys. I'm Rob. I'm here without Alex, one bi guy today, but I have a second bi guy with me. He is an actor, singer, performer, writer. He has an awesome web series called Insomnia that he wrote and stars in and features a lot of bisexual content. Please welcome Vishaal Reddy.
Hello! Thank you so much for having me. How's it going?
Very good, you know, as good as can be during this whole pandemic, but we're moving forward. How are you?
Same. I'm good. Like, I'm alive. I have a pulse. I'm breathing occasionally. And I think that's really all I can ask for at this point. Whenever I talk to people about how they're doing, they're like, they kind of look at me like puzzling, and they're like, how am I doing? Like, in this like minute, you just don't know. Every day's different.
Yeah, it changes every day. And like, I loved your web series. Like, you did that work a couple years ago, finished it, put it out last year, and then pandemic happened. I mean, let's just get into this part of it now. How's your work going since the pandemic? Do you have any motivation to do stuff? It's hard for me.
It depends on the day, I think. So at the beginning of the pandemic, I'm in New York, so the minute that like theater shut down, I knew that this was going to be something for a little bit. And so I booked a ticket back home to Tennessee, where I'm from. And so I was with my parents for 5 months and like the family down there. So
Whoa.
yeah, I haven't lived at home since I graduated, since I went to college when I was 18. So it had been a long time to spend with like my family. For the first month, I actively tried to work, and then I went, you know what? I'm going to take care of my mental health, and I am not going to do anything. I can't create anything. What the fuck am I going to say? There's nothing interesting right now other than, like, doom and gloom. So I tried. And then now I've started writing again, and, like, I've been doing lots of Zoom play and musical readings, which are honestly, like, I hate them, unfortunately. Like, I'll probably get, like, dragged for that.
I just hope this isn't like all that exists in the future. I hope we get back to real live theater. Fingers crossed. So, before we get back to talking about TV and theater and your web series, I want to start with your bisexual journey, if in fact that is the word you use to identify. So, so how do you identify? Why do you identify that way? And tell us about like growing up, when and how you became aware of your sexuality, and like what was that development like for you?
Yeah, so I do identify as bisexual, but I have realized that I do use queer and bisexual like interchangeably, depending on the room and depending on like whether I feel like I have to explain myself to people, because you know that happens a lot with being anything other than straight or gay, which we can get into. But I've sort of always known. I grew up in Tennessee. I'm a first-generation Indian American, and so queerness, any sort of LGBTQIA plus related content or upbringing isn't necessarily valued, I think, it necessarily talked about as much, especially, in the early 90s and things. So I grew up in a very conservative, very white, small town in East Tennessee, and my parents were great in that it was more of like hey, you are definitely Indian, even though you are American, but you're not going to forget your culture. And so they instilled that sense of just like, this is how wonderful your culture is. We're going to send you to India every single summer. You're going to be immersed in the language. You're going to make sure that you have a good relationship with your cousins. So it was through like going to India and starting to see what other people did over there and how affection is different. Like, two men holding hands in India is not considered queer as it would be here, or people wouldn't question it. It is just a sign of friendship. And I remember when I was like 6, I saw two men holding hands and I went, that's curious. What's going on there? And then I also watched a ton of Bollywood movies, and Bollywood movies are very queer. Like they are so inherently queer and dramatic, and just they're wonderful. But it's very the old stuff is very, very campy, and I was like, oh, these women are fierce, these men are hot. Like what is all of this? And so that's honestly, it was through film that I kind of developed my like, oh wait a second, something feels different here.
Interesting.
And then I think when I was like 10 or 11, I kind of like knew. And it was also around that time that I kind of came to my parents. I came out as like an actor to my parents, and I was like, I like walked over to them and like had a presentation prepared and was just like, yeah, I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. And I don't know how, but it's good. This is it. Like I want to perform. And so I kind of set myself up for that, and then slowly started coming out. I also don't like the term coming out because it's this, it's sort of this, it makes it this like huge deal when like it should just be something that is a part of a person, but not the only thing. Yeah. So I didn't really have like a big coming out. I like kind of just like told my parents, I was like, yeah, I'm dating a guy. And they're like, oh, let's unpack that. And I was like, well, this is what it is. And that's kind of it. And that was kind of the end of it. And it's something that I think we're still figuring out, or they're still figuring out and developing and, you know, being comfortable with. But, you know, I have to let them have that time. And then my show came out and they were like, he's doing it. This is it.
So before that, did you use the word bisexual with them? Or like, did you just say you're dating a guy and they left them to sort of interpret whatever they wanted?
Yeah, I think that's what I did. And I think for the longest time, because I was still figuring it out, and it really wasn't until my like early 20s, like my senior year of college, that I was kind of like, I'd only dated women up until that point, but I think I always knew that I was interested in men as well. And I remember my like senior year of college, I was like, I need to explore this side of myself. And so I think Grindr was like a new thing then, but like Craigslist was the thing. And so I remember going on Craigslist and like finding somebody, and we went on a date. Like that's how, like that was like the first guy that I went on a date with, and it was so much fun. And I was like, yes, I'm into this. And so slowly but surely, that's kind of how it manifested itself. But
interesting.
I'm also a performer, so like you're constantly surrounded by queerness, and you're constantly surrounded by people discovering things about themselves and coming to terms with a lot of stuff. So like that was really interesting to see other people do it and then really hone in on like who they are. And I was like, I don't feel like myself. Like, why is this? And so you kind of unpack it that way.
I was going to ask, there is this stereotype of like being a performer or actor and that being related to queerness in some way, that like when you came out as an actor, that like that might lead to something queer. Is that just a stereotype, or like is there any actual connection about being a performer, embodying some character and like coming to understand, you know, openness or fluidity in yourself?
Okay, well, I'll disclaim this by saying, contrary to popular belief, I am not a psychologist or a psychiatrist, so I don't know what I'm about to say makes any sense or if there's any sort of science behind this. However, I do think that as performers, to be a good performer, you have to have empathy, and I find that queer people, because we face and battle so much just with our sexualities internally, that when we start to be a bit more open with ourselves and we start to be more open to others about what we are and who we are, we have to have empathy. And I think like those traits go hand in hand with one another.
Yeah.
I find that most actors are pretty, especially queer actors, are all pretty empathetic, and you know, I think that's the key there.
I think that makes a lot of sense. So you grew up in a pretty conservative area, and it sounds like you had a decent experience coming out, quote, to your parents. What about other people that you grew up with? Have you talked to them about it? Have they seen the web series? Like, have you encountered biphobia, or have people been pretty accepting since you've been officially identifying as bi?
Yeah, I think I've had a good amount of luck in that, for the most part, people have been really, really wonderful about it. And again, like, I didn't have the typical coming out process. Like, I didn't go to all my friends and say, hey, I'm bisexual now, or I'm queer now. Like, let me explain myself. Did I have that script in my head for years? Absolutely. I did that whole thing where, like, you're telling people in the mirror constantly, and you're like, okay, well, what if I say it this way? Or what if they react this way? You drive yourself crazy doing that. And so I did that, and then I think when I first got to New York, I started dating a guy in like secret, because I think I had almost figured it out, but I hadn't. And I remember then I was like, oh, I need to start telling people. I want to start telling people. And so that's what like led me to it. And I just sort of like would casually just like drop it into conversation. I would sort of just be like, yeah, I like work was this and I did this reading and then, oh yeah, I'm like having sex with a man now. Like, what, you know, just casually put that. And for the most part, people were really wonderful and cool and all my friends didn't care. And with family and stuff, it's been really interesting because I think it's still a continual process and that like everybody knows, like they all know, but they don't ask questions until like, or they won't ask questions until I bring someone home that's serious. And whether that is, I don't know who that will be. So I think there'll be more questions then, but right now they're just like, look, he's living his life. He's happy.
Yeah.
You know, that's all he can ask for. I have encountered a good amount of biphobia, which is always fun. It's always a fun topic of conversation.
Yeah.
Can you clock the questions that people are going to ask already? Like, there's like four questions that everyone is like, you know, like, which one do you prefer? Like, do you see yourself with one or the other? Are you sure you're not gay?
Oh, yeah.
And let me follow this up. Are you sure you're not gay?
Yeah.
Right?
Yep. My doctor even asks me every time I go in, so are you still bisexual?
Stop.
I'm like, yes, and I like you and you're my doctor, but I'm going to be bisexual the rest of the time.
This person's white, right?
Yeah.
Yep, there it is. Not to, there's no correlation between being biphobic and white. Like, don't come for me. Yes, but I will say the most biphobia, I actually thought women were going to be like, that was what I was most, when I started dating and like openly and out, I was like, God, what are women going to think about this? And then I realized that they were really, really cool, but it was white cis gay men that were the ones that always had questions and always had like sort of a preconceived notion about it or like an aversion or a fear to asking questions. And I'm somebody who like, ask me questions, like don't be rude. Yeah, it actually happened a couple weeks ago actually.
What happened?
This is also like on Zoom. I had gone into like you know that app House Party? Yeah. So a friend of mine invited me to like a hangout or whatever, and I met some of his friends, and it got like brought up that I was bi, and one of the guys who's a white cis gay man like did air quotes around bisexual, and then my friend who was in the chat just went, "Oh no. Vishaal's not the one. Like, he's not the one to, like, make those comments to."
Yeah.
And then I just sat him down and I just said, here's my dissertation on why what you said is wrong. Because now I can just do it quickly and educate and bless them with lots of knowledge, if you will.
Yeah.
But,
good for you.
Yeah, it's bullshit. Like, I don't tolerate it anymore.
Yeah.
If you are asking out of, like, earnestness, great. I'm happy to have the conversation. But if you're being petty or like spewing like vitriol, absolutely not. I don't have time for that. Yeah. I'm too grown. Yeah. We're too grown for that. Like, it's not cute, you know?
I agree. I love answering questions about my bisexuality when the questions are earnest. Mm-hmm. And over in gay male spaces, I've found that, you know, sometimes the questions are earnest, but very often the questions are like trying to prove a point. And most of the time that point is that you're really gay. You're not really bi. And I think it's because so many gay men maybe thought about identifying as bi or went through that.
Yeah.
And they think everyone else is like them, or that, you know, they don't have this experience and just it's so invisible that they don't believe it's real. And that they think it's easier to be bi.
Yeah. No, and like that's the other thing too, is that like it's not it's not easier to be bi. Like if I could be like a, you know, within like a binary or whatever, like that we've society has like taught us to be with, like, confined to, it would make my life so much easier. But oops, I can't be confined. That should be the title of my memoir, like, Can't Be Confined, like a Vishaal Reddy story, because that's my life in a nutshell. Have you had like a couple of, like, what's the worst experience that you've had with, not to bring up anything traumatic, but what?
I mean, I think like I was at a party, like a gay party right before the pandemic, and like none of the guys there believed that bisexuality was real. And there were like no women at the party, it was just men. and they just kept constantly asking me stuff.
Was this recent?
This was in like December. Yeah.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
That's vile.
I mean, I dealt with it enough that it didn't like ruin my night, and it just made me think less of the people who were asking me those questions. Like, I'm confident enough in it now, but I think when I encountered that stuff earlier, and especially before I came out, when I heard that stuff not directed at me but just overheard it, that I really internalized. Actually, one of the things that was like a traumatizing experience was I was in the writer's room of Law and Order, and somebody senior in the writer's room, we were writing about a guy who's married to a woman who goes out at night to look for gay sex. And we called him gay in the episode. And, now I would kind of fight to call this guy bi because he loved his wife, he had kids, everything was good except he wanted non-monogamy. And the senior writer said, like, once you suck a dick, you're gay. And everyone laughed and agreed and kind of moved on. And I laughed and agreed too, because I wasn't in a place yet to say something. And then I just thought about that sentence over and over for years. And it was difficult. Because then I was like, well, I might want to suck a dick, but I don't think I'm gay. But this was a person above me in a position of authority saying that. And it was hard to break out of that.
I've been in those experiences before. And you look back on those experiences and you're kind of like, God, now I have like the best clap back. Like I have something that would just be so fucking great and so funny, and it would kill, and it would also shut them up, but then also hopefully like educate them. Yeah, I don't know. You seem much nicer than me. You seem very, very lovely. I just don't. I don't have a lot of time for it anymore. Like, I think I used to, and now I'm to a point where I think because I'm just very secure with it, that if things come up, or if I see some sort of injustice, if you will, with this stuff, I don't necessarily mince words. My friend once told me that I have this ability to make people feel bad with like a smile on my face. And so which is horrifying. That's like the sign of a sociopath, I think. But I try to be as diplomatic as I can. But when people are actively rude, I don't have time for it. But if they don't realize it, then it's like, is it our job to say something? Or, is it our job to educate people? Or is it not on us? So
it's hard. It's a little bit on us, because if it's not, then who else is going to do it? But it's also like you can't walk around being the representative of all bisexual people your whole life.
No,
that's not fair either.
No, and I also like I can only talk about my own experience. Like I can't judge what other people are going through, and like a lot of people make those comments just out of like insecurity, and I'm sure there was something more deeper there than like that joke. Yeah. But I'm glad that you had that experience, because now you know.
Yeah.
How to react.
Yeah, well, and it's been inspiring for my work to put that into writing, and to, if I think of that comeback later, write about it and shut them up in the script, which is in a way what you've done with Insomnia. So let's talk about your show. You mentioned this biphobia and all these questions you get. You actually had a montage in the second episode of basically everyone on dates asking you all these biphobic questions, which I loved. Let's set the scene a little. So Insomnia is about, you star and you wrote it. It's about a character named Nikhil, who is an escort for both men and women. And what I really loved about it the most is that you mentioned bisexuality in the first episode, but it's not the storyline of the first episode. It's just, it's mentioned that the character is bi. And then in the second episode, you sort of tackle it a little more head on with this montage of biphobic questions on dates. But again, the episode is not about that in the end. And then it also becomes part of some other episodes. And then other episodes, it's not even mentioned at all. And it's not part of the story. So you really like found a way to make it part of the story, but not the entire story and not the focus. So tell us a little about just how you came up with the idea, where it came from, the writing process, and like putting in these bisexual themes without making it 100% about that.
Yeah. First of all, thank you. That's very, very sweet of you. The show kind of came it kind of came about by accident. And I've talked about this like online and stuff before because everyone's like, well, how'd you get the idea? Like, is it autobiographical? And I've said that like 40% of it is based off of me, and then like 60% of it is very much made up. And so like I said, I've always been an actor. Like that's always just been the goal. And so like I think I was like acting, singing, and dancing out of the womb. Like it's like everything that I have wanted to do. And I remember in high school, my drama teacher, Miss Smart, who is one of those teachers that was just like so formative for me, like growing up. And she kind of took 3 people under her wing, and she was just kind of like, I want you to know that because you're Indian at this point in time, it's going to be your blessing, but it's going to be your curse. This might take you a while. And I remember thinking, I remember taking that advice very seriously and like keeping it very close to my heart. And so when I got to New York, I quickly realized that she was right in that like my college theater bubble that I was in, just playing whatever parts I could get. I realized that like that's just, not how the industry works. The parts for an Indian person or South Asian people are few far in between. It's gotten a lot better, but even now there's still so much work that has to be done, but there's been a lot of progress. But at the time, I wanted to go in for parts that my white counterparts were going in for, that had depth and were interesting and dynamic, instead of these like bit parts with like stereotypes. And so I was chugging along, and there was like a month where for whatever reason, the universe did this to me. I was in like final callbacks for like 3 Broadway shows and like 2 TV shows, and was like, cool, one of these are gonna land. And I was like really excited about all of them. And I found out within a week that I lost all of them. Like they went to somebody else, which is horrifying. And I think I was 26 at that point. Like I just turned 26. I was really sad because like I felt like I had failed, and so I actually quit. I quit for a month, and I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. And then I think after a lot of complaining to my friends, one good friend of mine was like, why don't you just make something? Like, go write something. And I was like, I've never written. Like, I don't know how to do that. And he was like, just go do it. Like, you complain about all of this so much. Like, go and actually try to change something. And so I started writing anything that I could, and knew I wanted to tell a story about a bisexual person and mental health. That's all I sort of knew. I knew that as an Indian person, as a bisexual person, mental health is extremely important to South Asian people, but it's something that is still very taboo to talk about. And we like to sweep everything under the rug. And so I knew that was really important to me because I wanted it to be something new and different. And I knew that for the Indian characters that it centers around, I was like, I just want them to be, and just be able to brush their teeth on camera. Like that, like, I mean, or like go to the grocery store. Like, I know that's like the simplest thing in the world, but like, we don't ever get to just do simple tasks. It's always rooted in some sort of like stereotype or caricature. And so I started writing, and then I went to a bar one night, and I had been trying to figure out what this character's secret was going to be, because I got feedback on a script being like, there's nothing, like, what is this? Like, he doesn't have a secret. And I was like, okay, let me think. So I shifted through a lot of things, and then when I went to a bar, a guy came up to me and asked me if I wanted to be an escort. And he was like, he ran a little agency, and like, he was like, there's a lot of people that want like an Indian person as like a fetish, and would you be interested? And I genuinely thought it was my friends just like fucking with me, because like these are the kinds of people I surround myself with, just a bunch of lovable assholes who are just very sarcastic, and I love them, but I was like, oh, this is a joke. And I said, you know what, I'm good. Thank you so much. That's very flattering, but I think I'm good. And before he walked away, he was like, you know what, you're right, Indian people don't do this kind of stuff. And I went, oh, that microaggression, that's his character's secret. Because like, as an Indian actor, like, I would never get to go in for a part like this. So it kind of, the series was created in a way of like, what things don't I get to do as a performer, and then how can we make them new, interesting, and fresh for like new people, but also tie in little Indian things, language, cultural things that only Indian people are going to get, and not explain them. And so that was sort of the goal of it.
Awesome. Well, it's really successful, and the show turned out great. I mean, it looks really awesome, and it's really clever, and it moves fast, and so you guys did a great job. I don't know if you had a big budget, but you made it seem like you did. So if you didn't, you stretched it very well.
I think we shot it for like $58,000 about.
Wow. Like the whole thing. So like 10 per episode?
Well, not even. Like that 58,000 like included like post, pre-pro, cast, crew, but then also like press, our like premiere party. Like we were pulling favors. Like we were just really lucky that a lot of people believed in it and were excited about it. And so it was really like a labor of love.
How long did it take to shoot? Just curious.
6 days.
6 days? The whole thing?
Yeah, we shot almost 70 pages in 6 days.
Oh my God. That's insane.
Yeah, we just did 12-hour days.
Wow.
It was like very efficient.
Yeah, I was going to say you wrote it very economically and you must have shot it efficiently because like you have so many locations and characters in that short a time. Wow.
Yeah.
I'm even more impressed now.
Oh geez, yeah. I mean, I just knew that I needed to pack a lot of information in, but also make it seem very natural and like the story is told from this character was one character's like vantage point, but I wanted people to see the peripheral characters that sort of make up the world that he's in, but still make it very much his story. And I'm proud of it.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I loved it. So I want to dig into some of that. You mentioned like the little references to Indian culture, which I thought made it seem very real, even when I didn't get the reference. So like I didn't get the reference to the Indian cereals, but it made me kind of think that that episode might have some similar thematic elements. Can you tell me what that means and how the cereals influence the show? And also like the next episode with the pretty racist couple, like
sure,
is that stuff you've encountered? Like how did you decide what to put into the show?
Yeah. So I had written this as a pilot to start, and we had pitched it to a couple of like networks, and they were kind of like, you're not a name, get out of our faces. And I went, okay, fair. Give me a year and I'll show you like what I can do. And so then from there I took the pilot, and I think there are only 2 scenes in the pilot that made it into this one, so I wrote new stuff. And it's the opening like sex scene, the Star Wars sex scene, that was in the pilot, and then the scene with my friends was actually in the pilot. And so I knew that at least with the escorting stuff, I knew that I wanted to show 3 different kinds of stuff. I knew that I wanted it to be like a boyfriend experience, an actual like sexual encounter, and then I knew that I wanted there to be something with like sex and race, because sometimes in sex these questions and these comments come up more than you think, and you have to sit down and have these conversations, and sometimes it's as blatant as like what happens in the episode.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And that was inspired from like my own experience, but also like friends who have had like very explicit encounters with people that like those words were said to them.
Which words, for those who haven't seen it?
There's a reference to there's a threesome with a white couple, like a very sort of young, wealthy white couple, and they, in the midst of an act, call the main character a towelhead, which is an extremely offensive term, and that has happened to a couple of my friends.
Yeah.
And not to me directly, but like a couple of my friends, and so I knew that that was important to talk about. And in terms of the Indian things, like, yeah, there's a little like religious iconography that's in the show that we don't really talk about, but like if you're Indian, you know the gods that we're talking about. Like Ganesh, the god, sort of makes a quite an appearance throughout the series, and there's little like Easter eggs in there. Then there's a scene with my friends, and there's like an old Bollywood movie playing in the background that like you can't really see in the final cut, but like it's there and you kind of hear the music. And even in that scene, there's little Indian things that me and my friends say to one another that like it's just how me and my friends interact with one another. There's Indian food. Like I speak Telugu, which is the language that my parents speak in like their state and what I grew up like listening to and speaking. So there's like little things in there that I put in on purpose so that, you know, Indian people can get it and also just feel seen and be like, we're not going to explain this to anyone else. Like, we don't need to. The Indian serial comment was Indian soap operas are called serials, and so they are truly the most dramatic things in the world. Like if I wish I could show you, podcasting is not a visual medium, I forget, but they are even more dramatic than the ones that we have here. And so when we reference those, it's in a reference to like familial drama that's happening with the main character. So yeah,
I like that. And I loved the racist couple episode, like how it built up to that place. Like there were these little microaggressions leading up to it, and it just felt very real, of like how racism works.
I just felt bad that I asked my friends to say those things. I remember sending that script to both of them, and I was like, I'm truly so sorry that I'm going to make you say these things, and also have like simulated sex, in not a lot of clothing. So like, and those were my first sex scenes. I've never done a sex scene before, and so like when we got on set, I was understandably like sort of nervous, but I'm also like, I couldn't appear nervous because it's like, it's my fault. Like, it's truly my fault.
Asking them to do it, yeah.
And I also wrote it, and so it's just like, there's no one to blame but me.
I noticed that episode has the most views aside from the pilot, possibly because of.
Does it actually?
Yeah, because I just surmised it's because of the thumbnail photo of the three of you half naked.
I mean, that's fair. That's fair. My co-stars are very wonderful, smart, and attractive human beings. I'm sure.
Yeah. So you mentioned like wanting to write about mental health, which I think is awesome. And we did an episode on that a couple of weeks ago. We've been trying to talk more about that because as we talked about earlier, it's not easy to be bi. The studies actually show that it's uniquely difficult. So I'm curious,
it's so hard sometimes.
Yes. You had a support group episode or a scene in a support group for insomnia.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, like, how much of that is based on reality? What mental health challenges have you faced in your life? How much of that did you put in? Like, what comes from your life and what doesn't?
Yeah, oddly enough, I've never actually experienced insomnia, but when I was thinking about the title, I could not figure out what I wanted to call the show because I wanted something that sort of dealt with mental health, but then also dealt with like something that was sort of a play off of night and like escorting and, you know, the things that happen at night. And so I settled on insomnia because I was like, insomnia can be caused by trauma, and this character is dealing with a lot of mental health and trauma. I won't give it away so people can watch it, so please keep streaming it. And so I knew that once I figured out the title, I was like, oh, this makes sense, because insomnia can be a byproduct of like mental health struggles, of trauma, and also this character is escorting and he's out at night a lot, and that you know, and he's also finding that like his escorting, while a secret, it sort of is what's giving him the freedom to like be, and he starts to sort of harness that like, oh, I'm good at this and I'm actually becoming the person that I used to be after these like traumatic events. So for me, mental health has been a journey. It's still a goddamn journey. I've struggled with depression. I very severe depression. I actually just started taking antidepressants, and that was part of my like beginning of quarantine, was like,
oh wow,
being at home. And I actually got depressed, and my mom and dad were like, what's wrong with you? Like, why are you? And I was like, cool. When I had brought this up before with them, they were like, you're fine. Like, don't worry about it. Like, just like, don't think about it. Like, everything's fine. We'll like take care of you. And I was like, no, there's a chemical imbalance in my brain. And so one of the very like lovely things that happened when I was at home was my parents actually got to see me go through like a 2-week depression, and I was like, this is what happens to me half the year, and I don't know why. Like, I have a lovely life, and I'm in a tough industry and in a tough city, and a lot of that can weigh you down. And so it was because of them seeing that and also having very honest conversations that I, you know, got on antidepressants, and it's changed my life. Like, you know, I know medication's not for everyone, but like, it has changed my life. And also talking to other Indian people, especially if they are from India and coming over here, a lot of my family's friends, whenever they'd be like, why are you depressed? Like, it's still very like, don't talk about this, like, what's going on? And I've just become very open and honest about it. And so I'm very happy that I put it into the show, just because I think I had been depressed for like 5 years and didn't address it until recently. And I went through my mid-20s just depressed the entire time, and could not figure out why I was like so sad. And now that I have done that with a combination of therapy, it truly has changed my life. And so I am very vocal about it, and, you know, a part of like South Asian mental health organizations, and like work with them on things, just because like I can't express to you enough like how how often it's just not talked about and how people don't want to talk about it because there's a perception that all your problems are your own and you shouldn't talk about them and that you should appear to be perfect and like there's no problems in your life and that all is well. And I have friends that are the same way. They still carry on that mentality, and I am very much not like that. And so it can cause friction with family sometimes and friends, but I don't really care anymore.
Good. I know exactly what you mean. And I think that's great that you put it in. Like, the more we talk about it, the better, because there's so much stigma around it, and there's so much like, don't admit anything. If you go to therapy, it means something's wrong with you. But
when that was a thing, when like
I know so many people that still think that's
really.
The way it is.
I feel like I've surrounded myself with people that like, and especially being in New York, everyone's in therapy. Like,
well,
literally,
that's true.
It's literally when you say you're going to like you're seeing your therapist. It's like, yeah, I'm gonna go get that scone. Like that's literally what it is. Yeah. But I remember growing up and hearing a family friend say that they were going to therapy, and I remember like just being like, "Oh, are you okay?"
What's wrong with it?
And they're like, "Yeah, we're good. Like this is good." Yeah, I tell my entire family on a daily basis that they need to be in therapy. They don't listen, but they should.
Do you have much of a queer community in New York? Do you have a specific bisexual community?
I do have a large queer community in New York City, which is very, very great, but I'm always looking to grow that community, especially like queer people of color. I'm always looking for more queer people of color in my life. I actually don't have I don't have a ton of bisexual people in my life now that I'm like thinking about it. Every person is kind of on various identifiers or non-identifiers, but not a ton of bisexual people. I'm always looking for those people. There's a large queer South Asian population, which is really, really great. And they have been wonderful. And I am sort of still getting to know so many people because it's a much larger community than like I actually thought. And so with Insomnia, it's kind of opened my world up to all of them, which has been so great and so cool. But yeah, it's lovely. It's really nice. I'm very lucky that I've got, that kind of community, but I'm still cultivating it. It's like it's a work in progress. You're kind of always, I've heard this thing where like I turn 30 at the end of this year and they say like, well, after you turn 30, you like don't make new friends. And I'm like, I think that I'm going to do the opposite. I think I'm going to make so many more friends while I'm in my 30s because I actually am finally who I fucking want to be.
Yeah.
And like I don't really apologize for it anymore.
Yeah.
And all my little quirks and insecurities, like I just address them. And so I think it's a much more fun. It's so much more fun right now. So I'm excited to meet more people.
So there's a lot more bisexuality in media the last couple of years on TV, on streaming. Mm-hmm. There still could be more because I think bisexuality is much more prevalent than most people think it is. What are some of your favorite representations of bisexuality in TV or film recently? Do you have any?
I mean, I think the first one that I remember in Hollywood was Archie Punjabi on The Good Wife. Like, I remember that was like one of the first ones where I was like, oh, this is an Indian woman and she's bisexual and is sort of like unapologetic about it. That's fucking rad. And then I think the one that I can remember recently that I thought was just so funny and well done was Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. I thought it was so funny, like how that character like came out. And I don't remember their name, but
Daryl. Is that his name?
Maybe. Yeah. It was her boss at the law firm, right? Yeah.
Her boss. Yeah.
I thought that was really like interesting. I'm trying to think. I think the first one that I remember, this is embarrassing. The first one that I remember was Marissa on the OC.
Oh. I watched season 1, but I don't even remember the bisexual element.
Okay, spoiler. Marissa dies in a car crash, but then comes out of the car crash with no scars. Literally, she comes out pristine. Like, Misha Barton just looks beautiful. And, like, her eyes are closed. It's like, very pretty. But she dies. And before she dies, she has a relationship with a woman that is played by Olivia Wilde. It was, like, one of Olivia Wilde's first, like, bigger things. And that was the first time that I think I was really, like, exposed to, like, a fluid character in any way. And not... Because they don't really label Marissa it's just a relationship that she has, and I think that's really, really like wonderful. There's other like UK shows, like Phoebe Waller-Bridge's first show, Crashing, I think was also, there was the two men on there, and there was also an Indian character figuring out, like they were both figuring out sort of their sexualities, I think. Like
there's also Go
ahead.
Well, there's also I May Destroy You.
I was literally about to say that, actually. You finished it?
Which, amazing. I mean, it's one of the best things I've seen in a long time. And
I want to work with her. Like, she is just, that show was stunning. That's goals. That I hope to even make a show like an ounce of like how good that was. So
totally. Yeah. And the ways they were exploring sexuality and fluidity and tying that into sexual assault and other kinds of trauma and like other types of sexual experiences that are not assault but are unwanted, like that I thought was such a great representation of what a lot of people go through and a lot of queer people go through, and it's these things are like hard to categorize and define, and they dealt with all that in a very realistic way.
And I loved that like it was a show also about a very specific community, and it was very unapologetic that. And there's so much in that show that is not explained. And there's so much language that is spoken that like doesn't have subtitles, or food or religion or culture that's thrown in there that we just have to infer. And know that like the audience that's witnessing it, that's a part of that community, I'm sure identifies with it. And then I think that's so beautiful to tie that also into this story that's about like sexual assault and trauma and consent. And I thought it was wonderful. I thought it was so good.
Same. Is there anything in like mainstream media and these shows like that you think people are getting wrong about bisexuality or fluid sexuality that like you tried to do differently, or you would hope that people do differently as they learn more?
Yeah, I mean, I know for me, I haven't seen a kind of mainstream South Asian bisexual character ever. Like in terms of like on mainstream American television. Maybe I'm forgetting. Maybe there might be, and I could be misspeaking, but I haven't really seen anything that like spoke to me. And so I think for a lot of queer characters, what I hope to see, and I think we've moved past this point of like having their queerness be the only thing that is talked about. I think that's the thing that I think people get wrong. I think the queerness or whatever their sexuality is should just be a part of the entire person. And I think that the actual character in human that's like behind the body or inside the body is actually should be the focal point, and like what their triumphs and struggles are. I think that's what I think a lot of like queer characters are just not, that we don't get to delve into that. It's always about their sexuality. One thing that I was really cognizant of too is that like a lot of queer characters are just like hypersexualized in this way that can kind of get uncomfortable and voyeuristic, and it's just like you're just sort of watching eye candy do things, and there's not really any depth to the characters. And what I was trying to really, really focus on was, yes, I'm talking about sex work, but also take that old concept, twist it, but also showing the complexities of what it could be to be a sex worker and like societal pressures. But ultimately at the end of the day, as I have like an entire deck of things that I want to develop, I think about two things. One, what don't I get to see my wonderfully talented South Asian friends do? And then what South Asian centric stories are not being told, and why aren't they being told? And so that's sort of my jumping off point in terms of that. And so this was the beginning of it.
Awesome. That's a great note to end on.
Cool.
Well, thank you so much for being here. This is a really interesting conversation, and good luck with Insomnia and all the other projects you're working on and getting through the rest of this pandemic.
God, that's all I can ask for. Just get through the pandemic. Like, just be safe, be healthy.
Yep. One thing at a time.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is lovely.
Yeah. Awesome. Two Bi Guys is created and hosted by Alex Boyd and me, Rob Cohen. Our logo art was designed by Kaitlin Weinman, and our music was composed and created by Ross Mincer. Season 2 is executive produced and edited by me, Rob Cohen, and produced by Alex Boyd and Moxie Peng, with support from IFP. Thanks for listening to Two Bi Guys.